For the last 500 years, every major superpower on Earth has followed the same 7-stage pattern. A pattern so predictable, so reputable, that you could almost mistake it for a pre-written script. And right now, in 2025, the United States is playing out that exact same script with terrifying accuracy, not by accident, not suddenly, but slowly, consistently, step by step, exactly the way collapsing empires behave right before the fall. Let me take you back to where this pattern began. In the late 1500s, Spain was the king of the world. Literally. They had more gold and silver than any empire in human history. Ship after ship arrived loaded with treasure from the Americas. Their military was everywhere. Their currency was the global standard. If you looked at Spain on a map, it felt like they would dominate forever. But that gold, that endless wealth, became the poison that killed them. Because when money is too easy, people stop working. They stop producing. They stop innovating. Spain became addicted to imported wealth. Their economy hollowed out from the inside. And the empire didn't die in a dramatic war. It died in slow motion, collapsing under the weight of its own spending, its own debt, and its own arrogance. They went from global juggernaut to bankrupt empire in under a century. Jump ahead to the 1800s and early 1900s. Britain had built the largest empire ever seen. A quarter of humanity lived under British rule. Their currency, the pound, was the world's reserve currency. They controlled oceans, trade routes, colonies, and resources. The British believed the sun would never set on their empire. But then the bill came due. 2 world wars drained their treasury. Their military was stretched across continents. Their currency inflated. Debt skyrocketed. Countries demanded independence. The British Empire didn't fall with an explosion. It faded away because it was too big, too expensive, and too overextended to maintain. Within a few decades, the empire shrank into a small island, trying to remember its past glory. Then came the Soviet Union, a superpower built on steel, ideology, and military might. Tanks everywhere, nukes everywhere. Space race, propaganda, the whole package. On paper, the USSR looked unstoppable. But inside, the economy was dying. Industries produced low-quality goods. Farmers couldn't meet demand. Corruption was normal. Their military spending was insane, almost 1/5 of their entire GDP. Meanwhile, their currency was so weak that people didn't even trust it inside their own borders. When global oil prices dropped, the Soviet Union ran out of real money. The economy imploded, and within barely 3 years, the USSR, a superpower with thousands of nuclear weapons, simply dissolved. No war. No invasion. Just a broken system collapsing under its own weight. 3 different empires. 3 different eras. 1 identical collapse pattern. And now, America in 2025 is walking the exact same path. The U.S. has more military bases across the world than any empire in history, over 750. Troops in 150 countries. Endless commitments in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa. Every global problem somehow becomes America's responsibility. This is exactly how Spain collapsed, exactly how Britain collapsed, exactly how the USSR collapsed. Military overextension, ISNTA theory. ITS. The first stage of every empire. Downfall. Then comes the money problem. In 1971, the dollar was disconnected from gold. After that, the U.S. printed trillions without breaks. Since 2000, money supply exploded by over 400%. Since 2020 alone, $6 trillion were printed out of nowhere. Spain diluted its silver coins. America dilutes. The dollar, different method, same result: inflation, weakened currency, and pressure on the entire system, debt. The U.S. now owes over $36 trillion. Interest payments are so high that the government is borrowing money just to pay interest on the old borrowing. This isn't sustainable. This isn't manageable. This is how nations walk into collapse with their eyes open. Meanwhile, America barely manufactures anything anymore. Everything is imported: electronics, medicine, steel, microchips, even military components. Supply chains are foreign, factories shut down. Jobs left the country. This happened to Spain when gold made them lazy. It happened to Britain when colonies dried up. And now America imports the world while producing less of what actually matters. And then we have social decay, a stage every collapsing empire experiences. Rising crime, homelessness everywhere, drug epidemics, depression, political polarization so extreme that half the country hates the other half, distrust in institutions. Falling marriage rates, falling birth rates, declining life expectancy. These aren't random problems. These are classic late-stage empire symptoms. This is what happens when a society loses cohesion. But the most dangerous stage, the one that triggers collapse, is already starting. The world is slowly moving away from the dollar. Countries are trading in their own currencies. China and Russia bypassing the dollar. Saudi Arabia accepting yuan for oil. BRICS expanding, central banks buying record amounts of gold. When the dollar stops being the world's primary currency, America loses its biggest superpower advantage, because the US doesn't just use the dollar, it lives off the dollar. The world's trust in the dollar is what allows America to print endlessly without collapse. When that trust goes, the printed money returns home like a tidal wave, and inflation becomes hyperinflation. And that leads to the final stage. Collapse. Not gradual, not polite. Collapse is sudden. A currency crisis leads to a debt crisis. A debt crisis leads to a political crisis. And just like that, the global superpower becomes another chapter in the history book of fallen empires. Spain thought it could never fall. Britain thought it could never fall. The USSR thought it could never fall. And America today believes the same thing. But history doesn't care about feelings. Patterns don't care about pride. Math doesn't care about patriotism. The story has been written 3 times already, and unless something major changes, the ending for America might be the same. Maybe they turn it around. Maybe they break the cycle. But so far, every sign says they're walking directly into the same trap. Every empire before them fell into. And if you want to understand what happens after stage 6 and 7, stay with me, because the future only looks confusing when you forget the past. And history, if you read it carefully, never lies. It repeats, not word for word, but with the same rhythm, the same pattern, the same ending.